The story of David and Goliath began in the Valley of Elah. The armies stood facing each other across the valley. On one side were the Israelites, God's chosen people. Their king Saul towered over them, but even he looked small compared to their enemy. On the other side stood the Philistine army. They had a secret weapon, a giant named Goliath. The Valley of Elah was a natural amphitheater. The opposing armies, perched on opposite hillsides, were like spectators at a gruesome play. The stage between them was about to become a battleground. The air crackled with anticipation. The sun beat down on the valley floor. The two armies had been in their positions for weeks. Each day the tension grew thicker. The Israelites were weary. They were outnumbered and outmatched. The Philistines, on the other hand, were confident. They had a giant on their side. Fear was a silent presence in the Israelite camp. It moved among the men, whispering doubts and stealing their courage. They had never faced an enemy like Goliath. He seemed invincible. Each morning, Goliath would emerge from the Philistine ranks. He was a terrifying sight, 16 feet tall. His armor gleamed in the sun, and he carried a spear as thick as a weaver's beam. His voice echoed across the valley, booming like thunder. He mocked the Israelites. "Choose a man to fight me. If he manages to kill me, we will be your slaves. But if I prevail, then you will be our slaves." His voice was a weapon, striking fear into the hearts of the Israelites. Back in Bethlehem, a young shepherd named David was tending his father's sheep. David was a handsome boy, with full hair and bright eyes. He was small, but he was strong and brave. He had killed lions and bears to protect his sheep. David's father, Jesse, sent him to the Israelite camp with food for his brothers, who were soldiers in Saul's army. David arrived just as Goliath was issuing his daily challenge. How dared this Philistine defy the armies of the living God? David was not afraid. He believed that God would give him victory, just as he had when he faced lions and bears while protecting his sheep. "Your Majesty, I will fight this giant." Saul was shocked. "You are just a boy. This man has been a warrior from his youth." But David insisted. He told Saul how he had killed lions and bears while protecting his sheep. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul finally agreed to let David fight. He offered David his armor, a coat of mail, a bronze helmet and a sword, but David refused. He was more comfortable with his shepherd's staff, his sling, and 5 smooth stones from the stream. He knew God would give him victory, not armor. David walked out to meet Goliath. The giant laughed when he saw him. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Goliath cursed David by his gods. He promised to feed David's flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." David reached into his shepherd's bag, took out a stone, and fitted it into the pouch of his sling. He whirled the sling above his head, faster and faster. The Philistine, confident in his size and strength, charged towards David. At just the right moment, David released the stone. It shot through the air with incredible force and accuracy. David had been practicing with his sling since he was a boy. He could hit a bird on the wing with deadly accuracy. Goliath falls. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead with a sickening thud. The giant staggered, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment he stood there, swaying. Then with a crash that shook the ground, Goliath fell. The Philistine army gasped. They had never seen their champion defeated, let alone killed. A wave of fear swept through their ranks. Their champion, their giant, lay dead at the feet of a shepherd boy. Victory and defeat. David ran towards Goliath and with the giant's own sword cut off his head. The Israelites, watching from the hillside, erupted in cheers. They had witnessed a miracle. Their champion was not a king or a seasoned warrior, but a young shepherd armed with faith and a sling. The Philistines, seeing their champion fall, panicked. They turned and fled, pursued by the victorious Israelites. The sound of their cries echoed across the valley, a stark contrast to the triumphant shouts of the Israelites. I faced the giant not with brute force, but with unwavering faith in God. Courage is not determined by size or strength, but by the power of belief. David, the shepherd boy, became a national hero. He had shown that courage was not determined by size or strength, but by the power of belief. David returned from the battle carrying Goliath's head as a trophy. He was greeted with songs and celebrations. The women sang, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." From that day on, David's name was spoken with reverence and awe. He was no longer just a shepherd, but a giant slayer, a symbol of courage and faith. A legacy of courage. David's victory over Goliath is more than just a thrilling story. It is a timeless reminder that God can use anyone to accomplish his purposes. It is a story that inspires us to face our own giants, fear, doubt, insecurity, with the same unwavering faith that David displayed. David's story teaches us that true strength comes not from our own abilities, but from the power of God working through us. We may not all face giants like Goliath, but we all have giants in our lives. David's story reminds us that with God on our side, even the biggest giant can be defeated. The Shepherd King, love, war, and the birth of a legacy. The fires of war had burned out on the hills of Gilboa, and the house of Saul lay in ashes. David stood on the threshold of destiny, the crown of Israel now within his grasp. The people of Judah gathered in Hebron, their hearts heavy with the memory of Saul's fall, yet their eyes turned toward David with hope. He was the shepherd who had become a warrior, the fugitive who had defied a king, and now he was the anointed, the chosen of the eternal. Trumpets blared through the stone-walled streets of Hebron, the sound of triumph and renewal. Soldiers lined the pathways, swords glimmering in the midday sun. David walked among them, dressed not in the garb of a warrior, but in the humble robes of a shepherd, as if to remind the world of where he had come from. His eyes were fierce, his stride unyielding. This was not just the coronation of a king, it was the rise of a kingdom forged through trial and anointed by fire. As the elders of Judah gathered, oil was poured upon his head, and their voices rose in unison, declaring him King of Judah. The Eternal's favor shone brightly upon him, and the whispers of prophecy stirred in the wind. From shepherd to sovereign, they murmured. He will unite the tribes, he will restore the glory of Israel. But the path to unification was not paved in peace. Saul's surviving son, Ishbosheth, still held sway over the northern tribes under the influence of Abner, Saul's former commander. Yet David, patient and strategic, did not strike with a sword. He built bridges of loyalty, gathering strength while his enemies bickered and fractured. His throne in Hebron grew stronger with each passing season, and the hearts of the people began to turn. David's journey from shepherd to king was not just a testament to his courage and faith, but also a blueprint for leadership grounded in humility and wisdom. The legacy of the shepherd who became a king continues to inspire, reminding us that true leadership is born from service, and that even the humblest beginnings can lead to the greatest of destinies. Amidst the rise of his kingdom there was a whisper of longing in David's heart, one that even war and coronation could not silence. Her name was Michal, the daughter of Saul. She had loved him once with a passion that defied royal expectation. She had risked her life for him, defying her father's wrath to help him escape the clutches of Saul's spears. David had never forgotten her. Their time together had been brief but carved into his soul with fire. He sent word to Abner, Saul's former general, who had now pledged allegiance to David. "Bring back Michal to me," David commanded, "for she is my wife, promised to me for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins." When Abner delivered the message to Ishbosheth, the young king hesitated. But Abner's loyalty had shifted, and his word was iron. Michal was taken from her new husband, Paltiel, who followed behind her weeping until Abner turned and said sharply, "Go back!" And so, with a broken heart, he turned away while Michal rode toward the kingdom that would one day be hers. David met her at the gates of Hebron, the memory of her still vivid in his mind. She descended from her chariot, her eyes fierce and unyielding despite the years that had passed. They stood face to face, and though words were few, there was fire in their gaze. David reached out, his hand brushing her cheek, and in that moment the walls of separation crumbled. Michal, the daughter of a fallen king, had returned to the side of the rising one. Years had passed. David now sat upon the throne of Israel, his crown gleaming under the light of the sun. Kingdoms bowed before him, and his name was spoken with reverence across the land. But there were moments, quiet, solitary moments, when David would remember the wilderness, the days of exile, and the faces of those who crossed his path. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Jerusalem, David stood on the balcony of his palace, his eyes distant. A whisper of memory stirred within him. The hills of Carmel, a furious ride to confront a fool named Nabal, and the woman who had met him on the path, brave and unyielding. David, softly to himself, Abigail, the woman who saved her household with wisdom and grace. His mind drifted back to that fateful day, Nabal's cruel insults, the march of 400 swords, and Abigail descending from her donkey, bowing low in the dust at his feet. Abigail in his memory. "My lord, let the blame fall on me. Pay no attention to that wicked man, Nabal. He is, as his name means, a fool, but I did not see the young men you sent." David could still hear her voice, steady and filled with humility, as she offered him gifts and pleaded for peace. He remembered how his rage had melted away, how he had blessed her for her wisdom. David, whispering to himself, smiling, "The Lord kept me from bloodshed that day because of her." David's thoughts shifted to the news that had reached him soon after, Nabal's sudden death. He had known then that her strength and courage were too rare to be left unguarded. Without hesitation, he had sent for her, offering her a place by his side. Abigail had come, riding humbly to join him, her spirit unbroken, her grace untouched. Now, standing as king over Israel, David smiled with gratitude. Abigail, the woman of wisdom and courage, was still by his side, not merely as a wife, but as a queen, a counselor, and a testament to the power of grace in the face of fury. The golden age of a king. The city of Jerusalem shimmered under the midday sun, its walls rising proud and unyielding, crowned with banners of crimson and gold. From the balcony of his palace, King David stood with his hands resting on the smooth stone rail, gazing over the city that had become the heart of his kingdom. It was a season of peace. His enemies were subdued, his borders secured, and his name sung in triumph across the lands. This was the age of David's prosperity, the pinnacle of his reign. His family grew, his wives bore him sons and daughters, and the kingdom of Israel stretched from Dan to Beersheba. Jerusalem itself had been transformed from a fortress into a capital, walls fortified, palaces constructed, and the Ark of the Covenant resting within the sacred tent, symbolizing the Eternal's presence. But peace has a way of dulling vigilance, and even the heart of a king can grow complacent. It was the spring of the year, the time when kings traditionally went to war, but David had remained in Jerusalem, entrusting his armies to his general, Joab. One evening, as the cool breeze of twilight swept through the palace, David wandered onto his rooftop. His gaze drifted over the city, and there in the distance he saw her, a woman of striking beauty, bathing on her rooftop. Her name was Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of David's loyal soldiers. Desire sparked within him, a dangerous ember that quickly grew into a consuming flame. David sent for her, and Bathsheba came to him. That night, a line was crossed, a sin committed in the shadows of the palace. Bathsheba soon sent word to David that she was with child. Fear and guilt gripped the king. Panic and dread crept into David's mind, shattering the stillness of his conscience. A single act now threatened to unravel his throne, his honor, and his name. But David was a strategist. His mind turned to a solution, a way to cover his sin. He summoned Uriah back from the battlefield, hoping to cover his transgression. Uriah arrived in Jerusalem strong and loyal, his eyes bright with the fire of battle. He bowed low before the king. "My lord, you called for me?" David smiled, his words laced with forced warmth. "You have been valiant, Uriah. Come, refresh yourself. Spend time with your wife before returning to the front lines." But Uriah, loyal to the last, refused. "How can I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife when the Ark of the Covenant and my brothers in arms remain in open fields? I cannot do such a thing." David's heart burned with frustration. His plan had failed. That night he made Uriah drink until his speech slurred and his eyes glazed, hoping that drunkenness would send him stumbling back to his wife. But Uriah slept at the palace gate with the king's servants, his loyalty unbroken even in stupor. David's heart grew darker. The darkest deed, desperation, breeds darkness, and David, consumed by fear, penned a letter to Joab. He sealed it with his signet and placed it in Uriah's own hand. His own death warrant carried to the front lines by his own hand. The order was clear. Place Uriah at the front where the fighting is fiercest. Withdraw from him that he may be struck down and die. Joab obeyed. The battle raged fiercely against the Ammonites, arrows falling like rain. Uriah fought with the courage of 10 men, unaware of the fate sealed by his king. The retreat was sudden. A silent signal passed through the lines, and Uriah was left standing alone amid the clash of swords. His final breath escaped him as the arrows struck true. Bathsheba mourned for her husband, and after her mourning, David brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. The prophet Nathan came to David with a parable of a rich man who took a poor man's only lamb. David, not realizing the story was about him, burned with anger against the rich man, declaring that he deserved to die. Nathan's voice thundered with divine judgment. "You are that man! You took Uriah's wife, and with the sword of the enemy you killed him. The sword shall never depart from your house." David's heart shattered with the weight of his sin. He fell to his knees, confessing his guilt before God. "I have sinned against the Lord," but Nathan's eyes softened. "The Lord has taken away your sin. You shall not die, but the child born to you will not live." A kingdom shaken, a king humbled. The child fell ill, and David fasted and wept, praying for mercy. But on the 7th day, the child died. The palace was filled with whispers and mourning, yet David rose, washed himself, and went to the house of the Lord to worship. When asked why he no longer wept, David replied, "I will go to him, but he will not return to me." Through the ashes of his sin, David found repentance. Though the Lord forgave David, the consequences of his actions rippled through his household, bringing strife and sorrow. In the twilight of his reign, David would remember Bathsheba, not just as the mother of Solomon, the future king, but as a testament to his own fallibility, a reminder that even a man after God's own heart could stumble. And thus, the golden age of David's reign was forever marked by a shadow, a fall from grace that echoed through the halls of his legacy. In the aftermath of David's transgression with Bathsheba, the seeds of his sin began to sprout within his own household. The consequences of his actions echoed through the halls of his palace, bringing forth strife and sorrow. The tale of Amnon and Tamar would become a dark chapter in the annals of David's legacy. Amnon, David's eldest son and heir to the throne, was consumed by a forbidden desire. He lusted after his half-sister Tamar, the beautiful daughter of David and Michal. Unable to control his illicit passion, Amnon devised a deceitful plan with the help of his cunning cousin, Jonadab. Feigning illness, Amnon requested that Tamar come to his chambers to prepare food for him. Unsuspecting and dutiful, Tamar complied, bringing nourishment to her ailing brother. But as she entered his room, she found herself ensnared in a trap of Amnon's making. Amnon's eyes burned with a dark hunger as he grabbed Tamar, pulling her close. She struggled against him, her voice pleading for mercy. "No, my brother," she cried, "do not force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Do not do this wicked thing." But Amnon's heart was hardened, and he ignored her desperate pleas. He overpowered Tamar, violating her innocence and shattering her spirit. When it was done, the love he had claimed to feel turned to contempt. He cast her out, throwing her into the cold light of day, her cries of anguish echoing through the palace. Tamar tore her robe, the symbol of her purity, and covered her head with ashes. She fled to the house of her brother Absalom, who took her in and swore vengeance for the injustice done to her. Absalom's heart burned with fury, but he bided his time, waiting for the moment to strike. King David, upon hearing of Tamar's violation, was furious but did nothing to punish Amnon. His inaction would only sow further discord within his family, as Absalom's rage simmered beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. 2 years later, Absalom would exact his revenge. Under the guise of a festive gathering, he ordered his servants to strike down Amnon, avenging his sister's honor. The blood of David's sons stained the ground, a grim reminder of the king's own failings. The house of David was fractured, torn apart by lust, deceit, and vengeance. The once golden age of his reign was now overshadowed by the darkness of his sins, a legacy of sorrow that would haunt him until his dying days. The sun hung high over Jerusalem, its light shimmering off the stone walls and cascading onto the streets, now brimming with anticipation. A river of people flooded the pathways, eyes wide with expectancy, voices murmuring with reverence and awe. Drums beat steadily in the distance, their rhythm pulsing through the veins of every soul that gathered. The Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of God's promise and his presence, was coming home. David stood at the front of the procession, his eyes fixed on the sacred ark that glimmered in the sunlight, carried on the shoulders of the Levites. It had been too long exiled, too long away from the heart of its people. Today that would change. Trumpeters blew their horns, sending triumphant blasts echoing over the hills. The sound was like thunder rolling over the mountains, a declaration to the heavens and earth alike that Israel's king was leading God's presence back to its rightful place. Flanking the ark were priests adorned in white linen, their hands steady, their faces bowed in solemn reverence. Every step they took was measured, deliberate, as if the ground beneath them was hallowed by their very touch. Suddenly, David could no longer contain the joy that swelled within him. His heart, bursting with devotion, overflowed into dance. He flung aside the heavy trappings of royalty, casting off his regal robes, and leaped into the streets with nothing but a simple linen ephod swaying around his legs. His feet struck the earth with vigor, his hands reaching skyward as he spun and twirled with unrestrained joy. He was not merely dancing, he was worshipping, with every fibre of his being, unashamed before the eyes of men, honoured before the eyes of God. The musicians played louder, cymbals crashing and tambourines shaking. Flutes wept sweet melodies, and harps sang with heavenly grace. The people of Israel erupted into cheers, clapping and singing, swept up in the king's spirit. Mothers lifted their children high so they could see the spectacle. Men pounded their chests in rhythm, and the elders wept openly, seeing in David's dance the soul of a nation reborn. Yet not all eyes looked upon David with admiration. From a high window in the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul and David's wife, gazed down upon the celebration with disdain etched into her face. Her eyes narrowed as she watched her husband whirl and leap before the commoners, the linen ephod fluttering loosely around him. To her, it was a disgrace. A king parading about as a peasant in the streets, unworthy of the crown he wore. Her heart, hardened by pride and lingering shadows of her father's legacy, turned cold. The ark was finally placed in the tent David had prepared. A hush fell over the crowd as the priests carefully settled it in its place. Then the ground seemed to tremble as David, still flushed with joy, lifted his voice in a song of praise. The crowd joined in, their voices rising as one, filling the city with the sound of worship that spilled over the walls and into the valleys beyond. David then offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord, his hands lifting bread and wine as symbols of thanksgiving. When it was done, he distributed bread, meat, and raisin cakes to every man and woman present, a feast for the entire nation to share. Joy rippled through the crowd, laughter and singing echoed across the plains of Judah. It was a day marked by unity, by celebration, by the restoration of the presence of God. Yet, When David returned to his household, his spirit still soaring with the echoes of worship, Michal met him in the doorway, her eyes sharp and her voice cutting. "How distinguished the king of Israel looked today," she sneered, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Dancing half-naked in the sight of slave girls, shameless as any common fool." David's smile did not falter, nor did the light in his eyes dim. He stepped closer, his voice steady but firm. "It was before the Lord, who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house," he replied, his eyes locking with hers. "I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, if it means honoring him." Michal's eyes burned with prideful rage, yet David did not waver. He would not apologize for worshipping with abandon, nor would he bow to the pride that had shackled her spirit. The doorway seemed to crackle with the tension of two hearts bound by marriage but divided by spirit. She turned away, her heart colder than stone, and from that day on she would bear no children, a legacy of pride that would wither in the shadow of David's unyielding worship. Outside, the fires of celebration still burned brightly, the songs of Israel reaching into the heavens. David stepped back out onto the balcony, his gaze sweeping across the city. Jerusalem, his city, the city of David. He raised his hands to the night sky, and the stars seemed to shine brighter, reflecting the fire that burned within him. The Ark of Glory had come home, and with it, the heart of Israel beat anew. The story of David is more than just history. It's a testament to the power of faith, courage, and redemption. Just as David faced his giants with unshakable belief, we too can confront the challenges that seem insurmountable in our own lives. His journey from shepherd boy to king is proof that greatness is not defined by birth or status, but by the strength of one's heart and the faith to trust in something greater. If this story inspired you, imagine the power of living with that same courage and faith every day. I encourage you to reflect on the giants in your own life, fear, doubt, uncertainty, and face them head-on, knowing that, like David, you are not alone. God's presence, strength, and guidance are with you every step of the way. Don't let your dreams fall to the wayside. Don't let fear hold you back. Like David, take that first step into the valley and know that victory is possible. If you enjoyed this journey through David's story, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories of faith and courage. Leave a comment below. What giant are you facing right now, and how can faith help you conquer it? Let's support each other on this journey. Stay connected for more inspiring stories that lift your spirit and strengthen your faith. Together, let's continue to walk boldly into our destiny, just like David did. Thank you for watching, and remember, no giant is too big when God is on your side. See you soon.